Good evening, all, and welcome to another episode of Carta Divina on this Friday, the first one that seems to be a little bit more human after what has been a, shall we say, unprecedented 3 weeks for most Romanians. We have with us this evening my colleague Andra and my colleague Nicola, and our guest for tonight unfortunately experiences some technical difficulties, but I think, Nicola, you can introduce us to Tom Gallagher.
Yep, thank you, Serena. Yeah, it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce this evening's speaker, Tom Gallagher. Tom is a British historian and political analyst, well known for his work on Eastern Europe, particularly Romania. He has written extensively about the region's political evolution, nationalism, and post-communist transformations. Tom is a professor emeritus of politics at the University of Bradford. He has authored several books focusing on Romanian political, social, and historical transformations, including Romania After Ceausescu, The Politics of Intolerance, published in 1996. The book we will be discussing this evening, Theft of a Nation, Romania Since Communism, published in 2005, and Romania and the European Union, How the Weak Vanquished the Strong, published in 2009. I think it's important to mention, given recent events, that this evening's discussion coincides with International Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December and also Day of National Solidarity Against Dictatorship on the 16th of December and the 35th anniversary of the start of the revolution, which was also the 16th of December. Theft of a Nation analyzes how the country sought to recover from a disastrous period in its history, while many of the key legacies of communist dictatorship remained. Having lynched the discredited Ceausescu in 1989, former acolytes spent the subsequent 15 years trying to retain a monopoly of control behind the facade of a Western-style democracy. They combined their political ambitions with acquiring the control of vast amounts of private property denied to them by Ceausescu. Political institutions were given a facelift, as in the case of the intelligence services, which became a crucial power base for the ruling Social Democratic Party, and the state continued to be used to serve narrow private interests. And that's enough from me. Over to you, Tom. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Nicola, for that introduction. I feel that those remarks of yours sum up quite neatly what I was going to say. Three main dimensions: political, social, and economic. I think in terms of society, Romania has witnessed tremendous advances. People are better educated, better informed. They are able to travel. They're able to obtain important material things that were denied to them for much of the 20th century. In terms of economics, there have been really important transformations, especially since Romania joined the European Union in 2007. People will argue endlessly whether it's mainly been positive or negative occurrences in the economic sphere. Now, the book was mainly about politics, and actually, of the three categories, I would say there has been the least change seen. And perhaps one of the main arguments in the book was that the elites that had held power, especially during the Ceausescu phase of communism, had regrouped when Eastern Europe, Soviet-dominated, was plunged into crisis at the end of the 1980s. And there was less genuine change, arguably, in Romania than in any of the other countries in the region, part of the Warsaw Pact. And you could say that this was part of a long-term pattern of the people being abused, different types of chronic misrule ever since Romania entered history as a modern entity. I think it's relevant for today to bear in mind that the communist revolution in Romania was a particularly intense and savage one. It had to be like this because Romania was an overwhelmingly agricultural society. And this urban socialist project had to impose a very different economic structure and sense of values on the country. So I think there was a lot of psychological damage done to Romania under communism. There was a lot of disturbance, misery, and tragedy. So when a vacuum opened up in 1989, you had two separate events happening. You had a kind of internal coup d'etat putsch, which resulted in the Ceausescu's being swiftly disposed of. But you also had a popular revolt in quite a number of the Romanian cities. To be positive for a moment, I would say that if this revolt hadn't happened, the chances were very high indeed that Romania could have just evolved into a kind of autocracy of the kind seen in former Soviet countries like Belarus or the various stands in Central Asia. So the tragedy of 1989, lots of brave people thirsting for freedom being shot down, I think focused the attention of the West on Romania and really reduced the options available to the successor of Ceausescu, Iliescu, second-ranking communists around him. But they were still determined to impose a very restrictive agenda. Change, yes, but change very much on their terms. I mean, the goal was a kind of facade democracy where Romania went through the motions of elections, parliament, etc., but a restricted group of actors continue to hold the political and economic strings, and whatever benefits accrued would go into a very narrow set of hands, people in large measure connected with the security apparatus and the economic system before Ceausescu. And some of these people are visible today in the media landscape in Romania and also in business. So Romania was, I think, a very divided country in the 1990s. People sensed, people in the cities particularly, that their opportunities to head towards the West and become a sort of normal pluralist country with opportunities and benefits widely distributed was being denied them by this group in power. So, and there were various dramatic incidents which remain in people's memories, such as the various Mineriada, the miners' descent on Bucharest, ordered by Iliescu when his power seemed precarious. And some might even compare that with, the annulment of the election suddenly by the Constitutional Court last weekend. Nationalism was manipulated in order to prevent the kind of popular dissatisfaction becoming uncontrollable. And this is relevant, I think, for today because, various hardline people, from the Ceausescu era were discreetly favored, protected by the party that has dominated Romania in the last 35 years, the Social Democrats. There were murky ties between them and the most outspoken and for a time dangerous firebrand, Corneliu Vadim Tudor. And I think if you look quite closely under the surface of the current crisis, you will see that those links continue. Ciolacu, the current PSD leader, was relying on a good showing by George Simeon of our in order to obtain the presidency. He wanted him to be the candidate. And so this meant that there was a certain type of transactional relationship between the supposedly now pro-European PSD and the other party. I think that the most important geopolitical event in the transition that had a big influence on where Portugal went this century, Romania, I've just done something in Portugal, so it's on my mind, was the war in the former Yugoslavia, which resulted in 1999 in NATO intervening to protect the Kosovo Albanians. Now, in the second half of the 1990s, the PSD were out of power. There was a very weak reformist government. The most important thing that President Emil Constantinescu did was to back the West over Kosovo. It was a very high risk thing to do. There was no guarantee that the West would prevail in this struggle. After that, I think the major Western institutions and countries looked far more sympathetically at Romania, and an offer was made for Euro-Atlantic integration. But unfortunately, the PSD was back in power, and I think they made a decision. Adrian Nastase was the prime minister, that yes, they could handle this challenge. They would try and drain the kind of EU offer of any meaningful reformist content, and it would just be a kind of simulated change rhetoric saying that yes, Romania was now going to rapidly move away from communism, but in reality, a lot of the old structures, mentalities, forms of behavior would persist. And the EU, I think, was very the EU had its handful, because lots of other countries were in the queue to join, and it only realized that it could be creating a monster by allowing an unreformed Romania inside. So it made certain conditions. Principle one was reform of the justice system. By now, my book has been published 2005-06, but I did kind of signpost what I thought the challenges would be. And this kind of emphasis on the justice system was enough to encourage a nucleus of fine reform-minded prosecutors, mainly, to try and clean up the justice system, remove it of any political, any overt political content, and enable high-level political crooks who were looting public money to be brought to account. And there was a kind of power struggle back and forth, particularly under the two-term presidency of Traian Băsescu, from 1905 till I think 2013-14, and the advantage went back and forth. But for a while, you had the remarkable situation where more high-level people in public life were being condemned for corruption and going to jail than in any other country on the entire planet. So this raised hopes that, after many convulsions, false starts, Romania was heading towards a period of normalization. Just to very rapidly sum up, the last 10 years, there was a kind of rearguard action resistance from the PSD hardliners. Victor Ponta stands out. Later, Livio Dragnia, were prepared to confront the EU. They said at times that, if Europe let them down, they were prepared to look to the East. And I recall Crin Antonescu, formerly a very important liberal figure, saying much the same thing. The tragedy for Romania, and I think the person probably who has played the most negative role in the history of the last 1/3 of a century, undoubtedly, in my view, was the current president, Klaus Johannes. He made what I would call a devil's pact between the PSD and his own Liberal Party, and they basically agreed to divide up the spoils of office, and it led once again to runaway corruption at elite level. It's estimated, I think it was the economist Andrei Karamitru said not so long ago, that 10% of state money is now regularly going into special privileges for people, in the kind of Johannes Camarilla pensions, sinecures, etc. The anti-corruption drive has been crippled during his second term, and competitive politics have died. Until the shock events of recent weeks, politics in Romania were no more competitive than they had been under Iliescu in the first half of the 1990s. Trust in the state has collapsed. I think that was shown very vividly during the COVID period, when the incapacity of the state, the contempt of many people for the welfare of the population was shown. So we've now had blowback, and it's something that figures, you could say, in the script of my book. I didn't see any likelihood of the exploitative relations between the state and society being broken up, even as the EU was starting to appear over the horizon. So in a way, the arguments that I set out have had an unfortunate degree of continuity in the subsequent story of Romania.
Really good roundup of the book. You have very helpfully touched upon some topics that we will return to with more specific questions later into the interview. As a starter for 10, I'd like to take you back to before this book and the start of your publishing about Romania. Where did your initial interest come from? What prompted you to start writing about Romanian history and politics? And can you tell us a little bit perhaps about your very first book, which was 1995? The very first book about Romania?
I would say that the arguments in the first book have been proven obsolete because, perhaps understandably, I was kind of traumatized by the extreme nationalism that had been used by Ceausescu to obtain legitimacy for what was a failing communist experiment in the economic field. And I assumed that the Romanians had been thoroughly brainwashed, that they had become very xenophobic and chauvinist and could easily be maneuvered and just become kind of stage extras for unscrupulous people at the apex of politics. And the book focused on the groups who Iliescu was discreetly supporting in order to intimidate and weaken the genuine democratic opposition. I feared that Romania might even become a second Yugoslavia. But strange to say that 5 or 6 years after the book appeared, then the kind of intensity of nationalism actually diminished. And it was clear that people who were voting for Vadim Tudor in the 2000 presidential elections, not necessarily because they were, really intransigent in terms of their national outlook, but because they were confused, they were disorientated, as I think many of the Romanians today who voted for Călin Georgescu were. I mean, this guy clearly has leanings towards Putin's Russia, but if you ask Romanians, in polls, as has happened frequently, what's your view of Russia? Only maximum 10% of people have a favorable view. So really, just to sum up, thankfully, the thesis in that first book was proven to be wrong. And in some ways, the problem for Romania, and this might appear a paradoxical thing coming from me, is that genuine patriotism, a sense of attachment to the country, willingness to do something to improve its position, to unite with other people, is much weaker in Romania than in the majority of other European countries. And this includes, some of those who shared the fate of being captive under communism: Poland, Czech Republic, strong patriotic sense, the Baltic states, hardly surprising. So, I gave an interview to contributors.raw a few days ago, and I caused anger among some of the readers by arguing that for many Romanians who had no reason to feel respect or attachment to the state, they were badly educated. There was no economic prospects for them at home. Romania to them was just a platform, a kind of lodging house where they come back to perhaps in the summer. Social media has allowed a lot of Romanians working in far-flung places to remain in touch. So, but they are staying in touch with their family, with their kin group, with the local community, not with any kind of institutions that personify a sense of Romanianness, because these institutions are very few and far between.
I have to say, I'm familiar with your writing and I'm familiar with your opinions, and even from my perspective, it isn't an easy listen to go through what is being said. However, if we look back, do you have any idea, a sense of how the book has actually been received in Romania? Has it been translated? Because as far as I'm concerned, I discovered it in the UK in its English version, so I never read it in any other language. And I never knew that you existed when I was at school, so nobody ever talked about Tom Gallagher in my school from a history perspective or even from a sociological perspective. And even if I look back in when I did my studies in France, where I did some history and politics and economics, etc., it was, I think, too early to be mentioned at the time. But maybe you can tell us more.
Well, there isn't that much to say. The strange thing is the book was published first in the Romanian language.
Wow.
It was just a matter of weeks ahead of the English edition, but Humanitas brought it out. They felt that it was an important testimony at what then was a critical time, a very close-fought election between Nastase and Basescu, and that it could liven up and quicken the pace of interest in the political drama. I did write quite regularly for a period of 5 or 6 years on a weekly basis for a newspaper which hardly exists anymore, Romania Libera, but which was for a long time the main kind of liberal Western-orientated newspaper in the country. I think one of the many things I admire about Romanians is that they are philosophical in general towards foreigners who take an interest in their country. There are closed European countries, I won't say which they are, in which people are very touchy about, even if the foreign chronicler has done his homework and the scholarship is sound. Whereas the Romanians, in my opinion, will accept you, will take you seriously if you show kind of that you have looked carefully into their drama, into their predicament, into their problems, and perhaps even shown a degree of empathy rather than treating them as kind of zoo animals where you can just point the finger and say, my gosh, that's extraordinary there, what we see there. So, I think the Romanians, are also a very intellectually curious people. They are interested in the outside world. They like encounters with other people from other communities. They're good in that kind of situation. They've got a lot of social skills, a lot of social graces, which British people have in far lesser degree. So, I didn't feel that I was treading on eggshells, that I was walking a tightrope. When I was in Romania and perhaps talking about, the work I was doing.
Thank you.
I think you've already addressed this question, but I'll ask it again in case you wanted to add anything else. But how do you view the book now, given the book being Theft of Nation, given that it was published in 2005, and how does the situation compare to now?
Well, I think in spiritual terms, the Romanians are in a fairly sad and desolate state. I mean, they have been let down by people like Johannes, in whom they placed a lot of hope and trust. I mean, look at those huge demonstrations that occurred in 2018-19 against Dragnea and, his attempt to create a very authoritarian system. I mean, people hoped that Johannes and not Kalin Georgescu would be their messiah, would be their knight on a white horse. Materially, of course, the situation of Romanians has vastly improved. The Cluj literature professor Adrian Papahaj has made frequent reference to this in social media and said that the position of Romanians is very favourable in all sorts of important aspects, and that it would be utter folly to throw this away and place all your hopes on some adventurer with very dubious links and no real plans for running the country in any kind of sensible way. So I think it's true. Romania has come on in those respects tremendously. It's just overtaken Portugal in terms of economic wealth. But we could spend a lot of time talking about, how stable is the economy, who benefits from the economy. What should Romania really be producing if it's going to have long-term stability? As I say, I'm not. I think the political thesis of the book, alas, has been confirmed by the events in the 20 years since it appeared.
Thank you. I want to bring you back to one specific point that you make in the book regarding Romania's ascension to the EU. And you say that it happened without serious reform. Do you feel that's still the case? And do you think Romania's relationship with the EU has changed, especially in light of Brexit, which seems to have rattled the younger member states of the EU over the past few years?
Well, I think Brexit is a non-issue, a red herring for the rest of Europe. But first of all, I think I should say that at the time in 2005, when I was writing after 2005, writing for Romania Libera, I was a critical supporter of EU accession. I thought a tremendous struggle would need to take place in order to get the best out of the EU. Unfortunately, the fighters were only found really in the justice system, people like Monica Macovei. The political world soon revealed itself to be full of rather mercenary people who wanted to make fortunes in politics out of EU structural funds. And President Băsescu, who I think history will be kinder to than most other leading figures during the last 30 years, was fairly isolated in his bid to build a strong reform constituency. And the EU, the EU itself had its handful with all sorts of issues. It could only really deal with one crisis at a time, and as we showed with the Euro fiasco, it didn't handle that at all impressively. I think in the end, the EU just had a tick box mentality, and I think the PSD, some of the more skillful ones, were able to play very clever mind games with the Brussels officials with their limited attention span, and maneuver them into the positions where they wanted to go. So, they were, the Brussels people just sighed and gave up and allowed a lot of the economy to, even though it was rapidly privatized, to remain under the control of the oligarchy, the PSD-dominated oligarchy. And too often, the Brussels people were just impressed by the impressive martial bearing of Klaus Johannes, who seemed an archetypal kind of oak, of stability and reassurance in this rather uncertain neighborhood. Whereas, he is one of the dirtiest political operators that the country has produced in the last 30 years. And he was gaslighting NATO earlier this year when he said he wanted to run the organization. I mean, that was, to me, a sign of the contempt that he had for the West. And during the 2-year war in Ukraine, his actions in support of Kiev, I think, have been very hesitant But EU people, NATO people were all too easily taken in by a phony like Klaus Johannes. I don't know enough about Mircea Joanna, but given his links in the old structures, I remain astonished that he became number 2 in NATO. And I think it reveals a degree of naivety, a willingness to be deceived on the part of people who are supposed to be building a new Europe.
Thank you very much for all of that. I don't know if you can actually see us. I was
I can see you, yeah.
I was laughing for the most part when you were referring to Klaus Johannes as an oak.
A rotten oak.
Yeah, for me, it's more of an ironing board that you put in a corner than anything else. But hey, so I was definitely not among the people that you've described as seeing him as a knight in shining armor. I voted for McAvey, and I voted against the other option. I never voted for Johannes, because he never was my president or represented me. Um, but I realized that I may be a minority. Staying in the international engagement sphere, um, how do you think Romania um, managed to create institutions that serve the public good, if it has managed to create them, um, to enable the country to be integral part, active part of the Euro-Atlantic integration process? What's the impact on the quality of governance then and now? And maybe a corollary on that, we hear even more so these days from the part of the Social Democrat Party that it is because of their work that Romania is part of the EU and part of NATO. What's your opinion on that?
Well, you have to say to some extent it's true. But I think they were happy to come over as proper Western orientated people, because they didn't think that this new kind of arrangement, this new departure, was going to really undermine their power position at home. And history has proven them right. I mean, I think the current crisis is a very good opportunity to try and shake things up, to try and get a clear out, certainly from the intelligence um, um, services, and for the EU, which ceased monitoring Romania remarkably in 2022 at the height of the abuse of power, the stealing by the people who had been promoted or tolerated by Johannes. Brussels today, without any kind of big expenditure of time or effort, could send strong signals to Romania. Look, you've let things slip really badly now, and you have to clean up the justice system, get better people, running the CSME, the DNE, etc. And I think there is a hunger for these improvements, obviously, in the Romanian cities, among the people who voted in large numbers in about 4 or 5 big cities for Elena Lasconi in the first round. And I think the PSD is on the back foot. It's on the defensive. It got its lowest ever score in the recent set of elections. I think a push to try and clean up some of the mess and put Romania back on a sort of virtuous path, stand some chance of getting somewhere. But the will needs to be there. And who is the new president of the European Council? It's a Portuguese, Antonio Costa, who was prime minister of that country for 8 years until last November, and had to leave as a result of a big corruption scandal. But it didn't prevent him being chosen by Ursula von der Leyen and others to be, president of the European Council. So the pro-reform impetus in Brussels itself is very weak. Deal making reigns supreme, which is really unfortunate, for Romania in this current situation, unless there is some kind of pushback against the abuse of power and the corruption. And the only beneficiaries of this will be the anti-democrats in our and their dangerous outside compatriots. I mean, our very cleverly has just introduced a motion to impeach Johannes. And, if the Liberals had any sense, they would vote with our to remove Johannes, because his continuation in office in the next 4 or 5 months is going to build up tremendous alienation and ill will in Romanian society. And you won't need too many Russian bots or TikTok interference to create a lot of problems. So I don't see the EU basically, unfortunately, as being a player at the moment in the Romanian scene. And as for the Americans, I think Donald Trump has obviously got a full agenda at home and in some important trouble spots.
A related question. I wondered if we could reflect on the role of or lack of civic mobilization and engagement in Romania then versus now. And because you say one of the most serious obstacles in the way of better governance in Romania is the very lack of public pressure for reform. People are not united on the basis of mutual trust, but only when forced by necessity.
You put that very well. That's a huge problem. And, I don't see any quick or effective remedies, unfortunately. It's understandable that people will grow weary after decades of unsatisfactory rule, and it's only in the most exceptional circumstances that they will be willing to go out in the streets to demand that politicians stop treating them badly. I suspect that Georgescu had been allowed to stand. I genuinely don't know what the outcome would have been if the second round had taken place, but let's say he had won, then I suspect there would have been huge civic protests across Romania as the implications of this became all too clear. So, but I think Romanians, there is a critical nucleus of well-aware Romanians. I think they are able to interact through social media, and there were tremendous mobilizations against Dragnia simply by using social media very very effectively. And the corrupt setup in Romania was ambushed by social media, by the ultras' use of TikTok. But I think social media, the instruments that exist, will make it very hard for any kind of authoritarian clampdown to occur in Romania, and that's something to be cheerful about.
staying on the topic of participation and citizenship, you also state in your book that the essence of democracy is still largely absent in Romania, and you describe the essence of democracy as participation and a sense of inclusion by citizens. Do you feel that still stands true, especially in the context of, as you said, the events of the recent elections, the fact that, for example, the voting rate for the parliamentary elections a couple of weeks ago was much higher immediately after the results of the first round of the presidential elections?
Well, participation and inclusion, I mean, these are in trouble all across the democratic world. And I mean, in Britain, the turnout in our July election was very low. I think understandably, Romanians fled from the polls in the last 3 or 4 parliamentary elections. The turnout was abysmal because they didn't feel included. They didn't feel that politicians had any even remote concern about their well-being and future prospects. They were just voting fodder, and to be abandoned, after the contest was over. Even though a minute ago I said I didn't think there would necessarily be an authoritarian kind of return to authoritarianism in Romania, it can't be ruled out, of course. I do think that a period of upheaval is quite likely, in which there will be vigorous and messy and sometimes alarming contests, for control of the levers of power, and perhaps that will have a kind of energizing effect on, on important segments of the population, and new leaders, a new generation of voices, of leaders, of advocates will come forward who will identify what needs to be done if Romania can be removed from the precarious position it has been in for such a long time. So it may be that we are coming to the end of a particular cycle in the story of post-communist Romania now, and because I just can't see how the rather sickening arrangement whereby the former rivals came together, made a pact to basically divide the spoils. I can't see how this can be put together again. I just think a lot of people have been radicalized now. Maybe not the most democratic, maybe not those with the most obvious elements of citizenship, but you can see where Georgescu got his highest support. It wasn't necessarily in the poorest parts of Romania in the south. It was in Arad, in Western Romania, which is seen as a kind of pro-Western output, where there are lots of Pentecostal converts from Orthodoxy who have, who perhaps are attracted by Georgescu's very kind of austere and I would say phony Christian influenced rhetoric, and also in Suceava up north, strength of the Orthodox Church, proximity to war-torn Ukraine, where there is anger and insecurity, not necessarily poverty, anger and a degree of insecurity which they were able to exploit. So there are lots of turbulent people around now in Romania who were far less obvious not so long ago.
It's interesting that you mentioned Suceava and Arad. I was actually thinking of Sibiu as the county of the ex-president Klaus Iohannis, current temporary president. Sibiu came out voting for Georgescu on top, which is fairly unusual, but at the same time, if we're taking into account what you've just explained, it kind of explains a lot. The next question kind of comes in two parts, and I was looking at a quote in the book, as well as a quote in an article that you wrote for Open Democracy, and I think it was translated for Romania Libera back in 2007. So essentially, I'm thinking about the desire to make a political choice based on the personality of the competitors rather than what they stood for appears to be ingrained. The importance of the personality factor in politics stems from the weakness of parties and the failure to distinguish between competing programs. You mentioned, the savior kind of archetype for Iohannis, and then Călin Georgescu pretty much had a very similar kind of narrative. And then in the article, you close the article saying, my prediction is that despite historic suspicion of Russia, the power brokers of Bucharest will not hesitate to link up with its economic interests, particularly in the energy sector, and become a phalanx of Russian influence inside the EU. In that event, instead of the EU becoming westernizing influence on one of Europe's borderlands, Romania instead could help to corrode the EU from within. So we also see that meeting some of the narratives that Georgescu put in the public space, echoing statements from Viorica Dăncilă, previous from the Social Democrat Party and others before her, and essentially, I feel linking up to Ceausescu's ideology and further deeper into the Romanian communist times. How do you see all this in the context of the current elections?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Sorina. I can't remember when I wrote this, maybe around 2007,
That's
when
correct.
Putin wasn't seen in the dark light that he obviously is today. When Russia was part of the G7, it was being courted. You had Merkel making her amazing oil energy deal with Putin. So, a long time, many people saw Germany as being closer to Russia in economic terms and with fellow EU countries. So, I don't think there is powerful visceral distrust of Russia still to be found in the Romanian population, except for those who have a sense of history, and how numerous are those, or who have grim family experiences of the Red Army and deportations, etc. What struck me was about following the Russian invasion of Ukraine was how timid, how hesitant the reaction of the power brokers in Bucharest were. I think the oligarchy has got used to Russia, and they, what would make them very insecure and nervous is Ukraine fully free of Russian influence. And releasing huge energy to restore the country, as happened in Germany after 1945, going in an unambiguously capitalist direction, and having at the same time a quite obvious democratic system. I think that would be a real threat to the status quo in Romania. Just as Putin was paranoid about the demonstration effect of a democratic Ukraine. I mean, I think there are a lot of people in Romania who dread the prospect of Ukraine coming out in the top, rapidly recovering and shooting ahead of Romania, causing a lot of people to ask, why is Romania still, in many key respects, a broken down country when look at what the Ukrainians can do. So I think there is an Eastern pull in Romania among important decision makers. It's been muffled, it's been covered up because the West, until quite recently, has been a quite self-confident and active player in East Central European affairs. But there are lots of movers and shakers who, if given the chance, would not hesitate to move the country sharply in an eastern direction. So I probably left out the personality factor, but I'm not sure how important that is, because the personality factor is crucial everywhere. Well, maybe not in Britain, where in July, Labour was given a loveless majority led by a very curious, personality-free prime minister. But in most places, personality is a big factor. So there's nothing particularly unusual about Romania in this respect. And programs have faded. They are. People sense that the party will betray the program if given a chance.
Thank you.
I think it might be me again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this does relate to my previous question, but I'll ask anyway because there is a slightly different slant there as well. I just wondered if we could discuss another quotation from the book. You say that external pressure will not work without social groups prepared to act as domestic advocates and sustainers of a reforming strategy promoted from abroad. There is no sign that such domestic constituencies are in positions of influence, and sometimes it's possible to even doubt their existence. I wondered if we could reflect on that in relation to 2000, well, the period that the book covers, and also the present day.
Well, yeah. Well, there was no reform impetus coming from the outside, at least not a sustained one. It was very spasmodic and short-lived, from about 2004 till maybe 2008. There was no EU grandee who was prepared to put their position on the line by tackling abuses in Romania. But there were lots of figures, maybe not top EU people, who were prepared to make squalid deals behind the scenes with PSD influencers who were sent to Brussels to wine and dine and bamboozle, gullible bureaucrats.
May I ask a question, Tom?
Yeah.
Just because it popped into my head. Was Tony Blair one of them? I know not on behalf of the EU, but it just made me think.
I mean, Tony Blair has built up a huge wealth portfolio by doing services for rather dubious leaders worldwide. But I don't think he was that closely involved with Romania. He did have I think, the typical breezy, self-confident, but naive and shallow view about what needed to be done in Romania. So he was a great person for gimmicks. So he thought, well, the media is really important for getting our message across to the people. So I think it was in 2004, he put a huge amount of resources into expanding the BBC Romanian service. No, it was earlier than 2004, it was maybe 2002. But within 2 years, all that funding was taken out and transferred to his doomed enterprise in Iraq, to try and win the Iraqis or whatever around. So, Blair was, a charlatan, basically, in his European policy. And I think Romania, in a small way, proved that.
Your book about the role that print media can have in a sort of healthy political environment, especially in the absence of effective opposition parties, because you mentioned earlier the unholy coalition, so to speak, which has been in government for the past few years. And you say that a lively print media with a strong investigative side holds the government to account more effectively. Could you expand on that a little bit for us?
The print media is now dead, if you don't mind me saying so, Andra.
Yeah.
So, it no longer, wherever you look. I mean, I was on a long trade journey a few days ago, and the same equivalent journey, by the end of it, you would have been walking past hundreds of abandoned newspapers, and I never saw a single one in the recent trip. I think it's harmful for democracy that this demise has occurred because electronic media, especially sort of personalized projection of particular individuals or themes or messages, memes, it can cause far more distortion, as we have seen with the Kalin Georgescu phenomenon. So I think it's a tragedy that the electronic media has really been captured by the state. I don't hesitate in saying that DGTV had some kind of brain transplant, and instead of being a very enlightened and probing station, it ended up, after receiving lots of subsidies from the coalition, just a creature, a mouthpiece of the status quo, unwilling to examine or comment on or allow debates about the various abuses of power that were taking place. And I think the abdication of DGTV probably did a lot of harm for the democratic atmosphere in Romania. And I don't think the people in charge of DGTV, people who have obviously acquired considerable wealth as a result of it becoming just a kind of sounding board for the political high-ups, should easily be allowed to get away with this. It shouldn't just be the intelligence services who are being held to account, but also media outlets in whom a lot of trust was previously placed.
What was your most credible media outlet, just out of curiosity, whilst you were in Romania? Sorry, Andrew.
I think it's really impossible to answer that question because media, um, uh, um, media outlets aren't static. They go through periods of real sort of nobility and and other periods when they are rather shabby and seedy in their prose. This happened with Evenimentul Zile and different other publications. I mean, the ownership structure it's like football managers in the England Premier Division constantly being hired and fired. The ownership structure was so crazy. I mean, I take my hat off to uh, G4media.ro. I mean, I think it's now been around for quite some time and it's had a consistently, I think, decent and effective role in trying to explain to its listeners, readers, just what's going on in Romania. It's I think it's a very fine media outlet. So yeah, I mean, I would single that one out. So to contradict how I started the answer.
That's okay. We do have the right to change our mind. Thank you for that. Thinking about minorities and the way that minorities were essentially portrayed back in the day of the communists, as well as after the revolution, there's always seemed to be those two narratives that kind of go head to head, of the foreigners who's invading and taking stuff out of Romania and the foreigner who's there to save us. The two narratives coexisted. Um, but just wondering, how do you see that in the ability to manipulate the politics of ethnicity? Thinking particularly, I don't know, of the Hungarian minority, for example, and their role in politics as keystone kind of. They're not a party, so group um, of influence, and then potentially the Roma as well. You mentioned Pentecostals, so religious groups as well as ethnic groups.
Well, I mean, obviously the RMDS, the Hungarian party, has had a big role in political affairs. The Roma far less so because they aren't organized politically. I, one of the perhaps beneficial effects of the decline of a sort of strong national sense in Romania is the fact that previous accusations leveled against the Hungarians, the Roma, whoever else, no longer have the bite that they once have. People just shrug their shoulders because of the erosion of their sense of Romanianness. So each summer, Victor Orban shows up in the middle of Romania at Lake Tuznad, and he makes what could quite reasonably seen as rather provocative comments about the condition of Romania. And usually nothing at all happens. People just, oh, well, that's Victor Orban. And I think the RMDS, I think in one of my Romania Libre articles, I was provoked by some kind of low life behavior from the party, just to say, well, it is the Balkan phalanx in Transylvania. The UDMR is the party that wishes to prop up the Balkan mentality in this supposedly modern, Western-looking sector of the country. And the UDMR has got, I think, a very clever double language. It says, we represent a minority that has been not treated kindly by Bucharest, and we are out to defend its interests, and we try to be modern and pragmatic in our approach to politics. We're not wreckers in the Bucharest political game. But you talk to a lot of Hungarians in Marosvásárhely, Târgu-Mureș, Kolozsvár, Cluj, Nagyvárad, and they are disgusted with their supposed Hungarian champions because they don't bring a lot of things back to the community. The roads, I mean, I travel by car from Iași to Târgu-Mureș when in June, I think. And I was amazed at how modern, well-maintained the road system was between in the Iași. But as soon as you crossed over into Harvita, the roads deteriorated dramatically. And you know, how can the Hungarians say that they have no, you know, that they couldn't, you know, help to build up the infrastructure? So, so I think there's a lot of cynicism. People don't have strong reactions in Romania about the UDMR. It's just another deal-making, rather sleazy Romanian party, which happens to have a Hungarian identity, basically. I mean, the Romanian, the gypsies, unfortunately, because they lack a strong kind of cohesive outlook, are all too easily manipulated in the political game.
Thank you very much. It was absolutely eerie listening to you because it really felt like you've been listening to all my recent conversations, observing the elections. I had a lot of conversations with UDMR representatives, and what you were saying, it was quote word for word, which is freaking me out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised that they still managed to get above the 5% hurdle to enter Parliament. I'm not sure how that happens, but there you go.
So maybe that's one of the things that needs watching because interestingly enough, they got votes from outside of the ethnic minority in areas where you wouldn't expect them to be, simply because they're not known for any Hungarian, you know, genealogy or anything like that, or presence of any kind. But they seem to have spread out about outside of their own community boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking to some of them, they were indicating that although in the past it had been difficult to prove their worth to the community, there is a change and a strategy that essentially is a lot more convincing now, and that is proven by the poll results.
Well, I'd love to believe it, but I'm just slightly skeptical. But you know, it will be progress if what you say is right.
I was wondering if we could discuss
How much longer have we got? Because I think I will have to kind of wind down in about half an hour.
yeah, well, yeah, we can carry on as I mean we've got a handful of questions left, but we can stop soon.
We've got 30 minutes, don't worry.
I was wondering if we could discuss the Romanian people's preference for simulated change or stop-go reform. I mean, again, this is obviously touching on things that have been said already, but in relation to then and now.
I don't think they have a preference for it. I think they're sick to the back teeth with it. Simulated change. I mean, they want the real thing. They, you know, they. I think there's a thirst for root and branch shake-up of the bureaucratic world to make it citizen responsive. And you know, I don't think people have just got used to the you know, rather ugly state of affairs that characterizes Romanian administration.
That was a quote from the book, maybe.
You sure? I said that they were used to, that they had come to accept simulated change. Well, you know, we say a lot of things, but I wouldn't stand by that now.
Mm.
Thank you. In the book, you say Romanians cannot easily locate themselves on the normal ideological spectrum, and the context for that statement is a 1994 poll when people were asked whether they belonged to the right, centre, or left of the politics, and you said 38% replied they didn't know where to place themselves within these categories. Do you think that is still the case? Do you think that still stands true? And do you think that has had any effect in the surprise results of the recent elections?
But what do these categories mean anymore? Right, left, and centre. You know, it's hard to say. You know, if they have any relevance for you know, denoting where the boundaries are in politics. I would say there are is a large segment of Romanians who are content to be led, who are content to give their votes on the basis of some kind of patron-client relationship. You know, the politicians will give some crumbs from their table. They will offer me, perhaps through their representatives at street level or in the bloc or in the market or whatever, you know, some kind of access to goodies. So I will vote for them on this transactional basis. But there are probably really a larger number of people, certainly the majority position in a lot of the cities, of people who want the people they elect to you know, be good representatives, to you know, to use their salaries, their access to public positions in order to return with benefits to the general population. So, you know, they have higher expectations. So, so you could say that, you know, there are people who who want politicians to work for them, and there are other people who are content for politicians to do what they always seem to do, which is to just transact among themselves and give them some bones. So I think right, left, and center. You know, what does liberal mean after 4 years of alliance with the former communists? You know, it's hard to say. The outlook position of the OSRE on a lot of issues is ambiguous. I think there are different voices on social issues in that party, and Mrs. Lasconi, I would say, would be on the more conservative wing of the party. The far right challengers, I think, are and Mrs. Soshoika and Georgescu are just brazen opportunists who are coming out with word salad, you know, with things that they, you know, messages and themes that they think will resonate with the ones that they hope to capture and use as their passport to power.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because in the book you talk about, I think, Partidul România Mare back in the day in the 90s. And you mentioned just now far right. Can we actually talk about the far right ideology in Romania? Is it Romanian born? Is it influenced by people abroad? For example, you keep influencing the Romanians in the UK, or Reform as it is now, or looking at the election results, if you see the results in Germany are the highest, where AfD is also the highest influence. Same for Italy. So that would be kind of one perspective. You talk about opportunistic behavior rather than ideology as well. So is that really the case for Aur and Șoșoacă and Georgescu and whoever else is on the far left? Is that across the spectrum? And aren't Romanians today any better equipped to cope with an open and competitive society as a result?
Well, I mean, this unholy trio of Simeon, Soshoika, and now Georgescu, to me, are just aping the kind of line of Putin. Putin says, if you want to look to a kind of Christian nucleus, where Christian values still count in politics, then you have to look to my Russia. And we haven't gone down the kind of messy, decadent, confused role or anything goes of the West. But if if you actually look at Russia, look at the social statistics, it's got one of the highest abortion rates on the whole planet. The Romanian Orthodox Church is a big business. It's more of a kind of, I don't know, semi-crime institution decked out in gaudy vestments than, a church. So, I mean, I think it is good politics for the ultra people to claim that they are kind of national conservatives in the same vein as AfD, Le Pen,
Maloney.
I don't think, I think Farage in Britain is more of a centre-right figure. I wouldn't say that he's a firm conservative. But it's interesting that in the European Parliament that the radical conservative or ultra-right or whatever you want to call them, national conservatives, are keeping away from Simeon. They don't want to be associated with him. It's been pointed out to them, I think initially by Viktor Orban, that these people were rather schizophrenic and not very frequentable. And there'll be no advantage from getting close up to them. So, I think this is just a group of adventurers who are using language and identifying with categories that they think will make them appear serious rather than as 21st century hydrux outlaws who, highway robbers. That's basically how I see these people. And when you look at the people who are now in the public eye, who are the lieutenants of Georgescu, this character Potra, who was very close to a mercenary who was doing all sorts of God knows what in Africa for a long time. So the kindest remark I would use about the challengers of the status quo is that they are anti-system. They are against the system, and because they are against the system that a lot of Romanians receive nothing from, it gives them, unfortunately, a degree of street credibility. And the terrible risk is in 2025 that this credibility will grow to dangerous levels because of the errors of the people in the current coalition.
We're on to the penultimate question. How do you see the role and influence of the Secret Service today compared to the 90s?
Well, that's an important question. I think a lot of the really alarming, dangerous people who were definitely prominent in Ceausescu's Secret Service and for a while afterwards disappeared into business, all property, arms trafficking, media, you name it. And the Secret Services today are more kind of institutionalized. They are full of bureaucratic figures who got there by pulling strings and arranging contacts, and they're not very good or very dedicated at what they're supposed to be doing, as shown by the head of the Foreign Secret Service, who was during a particularly fraught time when Russian drones were flying onto Romanian territory, took himself off with cronies to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I think one of the huge sins that could be laid at the door of the Johannes is that he substituted civilian party participation in affairs of state with that of security, of Secret Service people. And gave them all sorts of leeway, especially during COVID, increased the powers of intervention in all sorts of areas that it's hard to see have anything to do with national security, and made the danger a real one that the Secret Service could once again become a state within a state, as some believe it was under Ceausescu. So I think the Secret Service is problematic, and what spilled out about their unprofessional conduct makes me wonder if they're not susceptible to blackmail by foreign powers. I mean, I'm sure the Russians observed the head of the foreign intelligence turning up for rest and recreation in Azerbaijan, and they noted this, and they might make use of it. I think that if money needs to be saved in Romania, surely the first place to start is cutting out the deadwood from this sprawling and wasteful sector of the state. I'll probably have to watch my step on my next visit to Romania and not look out from high windows, having said that.
Thank you for braving it.
Sorry.
Thank you for braving it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've had a long life, and so I think there are times when you have to say what has to be said, and to hell with the consequences.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time and your very candid answers. It's been a very difficult past few weeks for us, and I think this is, at least for me personally, this has been a bit of a relief, a bit of an opportunity to do away with some of that pressure and focus it and divert it into something constructive. I'm going to ask my traditional question of the live interviews, which some people have found the hardest. Obviously, Carta de Viner is a book recommendation project, and we're looking for either books by Romanian authors or books that have a connection to Romania. What would you recommend us to read next for Carta de Viner?
Well, I think there are lots of biographies. I've had a lot of pleasure from reading old historical accounts of Romania, which show, what a rich, colourful place it is, full of human contrasts, human virtues. So, I can't pluck out a book from the ether and say, go for that. And I hesitate to mention some of the books that come to mind that may have a stereotypical view of Romania. So I'm going to have to be kind of enigmatic in my response to that question. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. It's your prerogative. I remain absolutely thrilled by your command of the Romanian language and your use of not so well-known words. So congratulations on that. I'm sure many people have said so before. Thank you again for your time, and thank you to Andra, Nicola, and everybody else that prepared the questions. Apologies, this has taken so long.
That's all right. I've enjoyed it. I'd like to make a special thanks to Nicola for having arranged all this and been very patient all the way through. And Sorina and Andra, thank you also for making this a challenging but very enjoyable encounter.
And thank you for taking the challenge. We definitely needed to hear some of the subjects. Last but not least, as part of saying goodbye, this is essentially the last episodes for 2024. So before we break for Christmas and New Year's, we want to wish you all a peaceful, reflective time with your parents and family, ideally with people that you love, and hopefully no squabbles, and hope for the new year. Wherever we end up, and announce the next episode, which will be the first in 2025, a meeting with Nicolae Rațiu, discussing the recently republished book written by Ion Rațiu with a preface by Nicolae and Denis Teletant. So we meet you back here on the 10th of January to discuss Moscow Challenges the World. From us, thank you very much and have a good weekend.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Good night.
Thank you.